Krishna Caitanya Prabhupada Jayapataka Swami
The following is a lecture given by His Holiness Jayapataka Swami on October 29th, 1983 in Atlanta, Georgia. The class begins with a reading from the Sri Caitanya Caritāmrita, Madhya Līla, chapter 19, verse 159.
Nishidachar kuti nati jiva hingsan la puja pratishtadi jato upasakagan Nishidachara kuti nati jiva hingsana lava puja pratishtadi jato upasakagana. Translation. Some unnecessary creepers growing with the bhakti creeper are the creepers of behavior unacceptable for those trying to attain perfection. Diplomatic behavior, animal killing, mundane profiteering, mundane adoration, and mundane importance. All these are unwanted creepers. Translation with repetition. Some unnecessary creepers growing with the bhakti creeper are the creepers of behavior unacceptable for those trying to attain perfection. Diplomatic behavior, animal killing, mundane profiteering, mundane adoration, and mundane importance. All these are unwanted creepers. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. There is a certain pattern of behavior prescribed for those actually trying to become perfect. In our Krishna conscious movement, we advise our students not to eat meat, not to gamble, not to engage in illicit sex, and not to indulge in intoxication. People who engage in these activities can never become perfect. Therefore, these regulative principles are for those interested in becoming perfect and going back to Godhead. Kuti nati is dealing with one at a time. 6 weeds we were discussing last night in the darshan about unwanted creepers or weeds which grow alongside of the bhakti lota or the creeper of devotion, and how they sometimes take over. They grow more, or they appear to be very similar to the bhakti lota. So it's very hard for someone to distinguish. So here Prabhupada is giving us, or Lord Chaitanya rather, is giving us 6 examples of this type of creeper, although there are more, no doubt. So the first one is breaking regulative principles, performing behavior unacceptable for those trying to attain perfection. Somebody wants to become perfect in spiritual realization, then the gross material tangling activities and degrading activities like unregulated sex life, illicit sex, without any spiritual purpose, gambling, meat eating, indulging intoxication, all these things are obstacles in the path of devotional service. Sometimes people condone taking drugs as some kind of an impetus for spiritual realization. There are other purports. The Prabhupada said that they're effective hallucinations. are accepted as realizations. One should not be confused by this type of a propaganda, that by taking any form of drug, psychedelic or whatever, that one is going to actually be able to achieve a real transcendental realization. Transcendental realization is not dependent on any chemical. It's dependent on the mercy of the Lord and on one's practice of the Lord's orders. So Prabhupada continues with the next unwanted creeper. Kuti nati, or diplomatic behavior, cannot satisfy the Atma, the soul. It cannot even satisfy the body or the mind. The culprit mind is always suspicious. Therefore, our dealings should always be straightforward and approved by Vedic authorities. If we treat people diplomatically or dupliciously, our spiritual advancement is obstructed. Jiva hingsana refers, Prabhupada says, to the killing of animals or to envy of other living entities. The killing of poor animals is undoubtedly due to envy of those animals. The human form is meant for the understanding of Krishna consciousness. Atata Brahma Jigyasa, for inquiring about the Supreme Brahman. In the human form, everyone has a chance to understand the Supreme Brahman. The so-called leaders of human society do not know the real aim of human life and are therefore busy with economic development. This is misleading. Every state and every society is busy trying to improve the quality of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. This human form of life is meant for more than these four animal principles. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending are problems found in the animal kingdom. And the animals have solved their problems without difficulty. Why should human society be so busy trying to solve these problems? The difficulty is that people are not educated to understand this simple philosophy. They think that advancement of civilization means increasing sense gratification. There are many religious propagandists who do not know how the ultimate problems of life can be solved, and they also try to educate people in a form of sense gratification. This is also jiva hingsana. Real knowledge is not given, and religionists mislead the general populace. As far as material profits are concerned, one should know that whatever material profit one has must be abandoned at the time of death. Unfortunately, people do not know that there is life after death. Therefore, mundane people waste their time amassing material profit, which has to be left behind at the time of death. Such profit has no eternal benefit. Similarly, adoration by mundane people is valueless, because after death one has to accept another body. Material adoration and title are decorations that cannot be carried over to the next body. In the next life, everything is forgotten. All these obstructions have been described in this verse as unwanted creepers. They simply present obstacles for the real creeper, bhakti, lota, bij. One should be very careful to avoid all these unwanted things. Sometimes these unwanted creepers look exactly like the bhakti lota creeper. They appear to be of the same size and the same species when they are packed together with the bhakti lota creeper. But in spite of this, the creepers are called upasaka. A pure devotee can distinguish between the bhakti lota creeper and a mundane creeper, and he is very alert to distinguish them and keep them separate. Thus end the purport by Srila Prabhupada on text 159, chapter 19 of the Madhya Līla, Sri Caitanya Caritāmrita. The history of the cleansing of the Gundicha temple. There, it describes how first Lord Caitanya and his associates went and they picked up branches and fallen down twigs and leaves and things like that that were just scattered all over the temple, which is not used except for 9 days in a year, basically. Then after they cleaned out all these things, then they came in with stiff brooms and they swept all the smaller little little things, and they swept all those out. After they did that, after sweeping thoroughly, then they took water and washed out the whole temple with floods of water and scrubbing and washing. Then after that, Lord Caitanya sent devotees back with little nails or with their finger, and they were scraping out in the cracks between the stones all the little accumulated sand and dust. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that like that we have to continually be purifying our heart. When that temple was cleansed, it said it was as clean as Lord Chaitanya's heart. In material life, our heart is filled with material desires, which is just like dirt, just like accumulated garbage. So the first desires, like the regulative principles, these are just like logs, just fallen down trees. They have to cut them and clear them out, you see. After you clear out these big fallen down branches and limbs from trees, then you have to clear out all the leaves and everything. So practically there's the stages. First the four principles. Alright, someone may be following the four principles, but then how is he behaving with the other devotees? Is he straightforward in dealings, or has he always got some other scheme, some other separate idea, and therefore always has to be lying, stretching the truth, being diplomatic with the devotees, can't be straightforward. Why? Because of some separate idea than Krishna's. So it has to go out of the way to maintain that. Then there's dealing with devotees, other devotees or karmis cruelly, harshly. Which means in some cases not preaching to them when they could be preached to. All these situations could be described as jiva hingsa, or cruelty to others. Then, just like there's scrubbing with the water, then there's fame, adoration, and distinction. You see. And scraping in the cracks, then there are so many other subtle desires that come up, where one has an idea, just like in the purport, Prabhupada quotes Bhakti Siddhanta as saying that sometimes it finds that even as a fairly mature devotee would get an idea to do some sort of business with the idea, I'll make money and I'll give the money to Krishna. You see, but because we've been in the material world in previous births and in this birth, you see, literally thousands of births, millions of births. So the habit to work for fame, adoration, distinction, to work for a profit, that groove is already there. It's just like in a reg, it's scratched in. You see, you have to avoid it altogether. So when even though they come with the idea, let me do this for Krishna, but once they get near that, inside that groove, even though it's quote unquote for Krishna, their mentality, Bhakti Siddhanta said, it reverts back to the original thing. They become attached. You see, they become very attached to those ideas, and even without knowing it, although all along they're thinking it's for Krishna. But ultimately they're just taking so much energy away from their direct service to Krishna and investing more and more and more time in this separate idea, which is actually an over-endeavor. So, Bhaktisiddhanta guided us that we should be very careful not to fall into this type of a thing, that the nature of the living entity is to work for some sort of profit, adoration, and distinction. And in trying to do something, even though it's for Krishna, we have to be very careful that we are not simply taken off, swept away by these type of desires. Even though it's not at all, as it says, it looks completely bona fide. It's not at all in the top of the mind. But it's like kind of fever that takes over and clouds the intelligence. Even though all along the person's saying it's for Krishna. So many times you see people leave. I'm going to do business. I'm going to give so much money to Krishna. And year after year they're doing their business, but in many cases you never see any service actually given to Krishna. They're always building up their capital or something or another. So this is what Bhaktisiddhanta has warned us against. So, like that, there are so many creepers that are competing with the Bhakti Lota creeper, and we have to pull them out. We have to pull them out completely of our consciousness. Creepers of illicit sex. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Dharma aviruddha maitun aham, that the sex life which is not against the Vedic principles, the religious principles, is me. I am the sex life not against the Vedic principles, the religious principles. In other words, Krishna himself is saying that if someone is following Vedic principles, is trying to have a child, that sex life, which is meant to continue the order of Krishna, they're helping him to maintain the material world. Always have to have more people being born, otherwise the material world won't be able to go on. So that's authorized, and there's certain principles how to do that. So someone who follows those principles, Krishna says that I am that sex life. It's nothing degrading. In the sense, in itself it's not. If it's done authorizedly, well, there's no bad karma. But other forms of sex life are degrading, they're polluting. They're not for, as Prabhupada said here in the purport, they're not prescribed behavior for those actually trying to become perfect. What happens is when one engages in activities against the regulative principles, it has a tendency to harden the heart. All these weeds, they have a tendency to harden the heart. They make the heart an unsuitable place for the Bhakti Lota to grow. Just like nowadays they have the acid rain. Where it falls, it can't grow any plants. If you have too many of these weeds, the whole soil becomes polluted and the Bhakti Lota just can't grow there properly. Becomes overwhelmed by all the other plants which are producing so many poisonous kind of byproducts. So one has to be cleaning the garden so you can plant the Bhakti Lota. When it's planted, you have to see these other plants don't come up again. Just as Mother Jyotila said, he let one weed grow up, it grew into a huge tree. That's what happens in the garden. If you leave a weed grow, it grows and grows and grows. Somehow, they have the ability, certain other plants, to suck up the fertilizer more than the intended plant. That's their special siddhi. So, of course, one time we were walking and Prabhupada said in Mayapur, what are all these plants? And I said, they're weeds. He says, no. He says, each plant has a use. You see. If you don't know the use, that's all. But in the real life, each plant has got some kind of a use. You can use it for medicinal purpose or something, if you know the actual use. You see, but for those who want perfection, these type of plants here, these are the real weeds. These are the ones that don't have any use for no productive use for achieving perfection and self-realization. They have a use of binding people to the material world, keeping them prisoners. These are Maya's and tricks, Maya's chains. So Lord Caitanya is coming down literally to free the conditioned souls. He's giving very scientifically what is the material world, what is the bondage of the material world, and isolating what are the actual, just like nowadays there are people who are suffering so many terrible diseases. And the scientists are being directed to find out what are the basic symptoms, the causes, the cures. Right? There's millions of dollars are being spent in their research trying to isolate the virus or the bacilli or whatever it is that is the actual cause of the disease. So then Lord Caitanya, He has already done this for us. He has isolated. This is the root causes. You avoid these weeds, and then your own spiritual progress will grow very nicely. Just like yesterday we asked little Lalita some question, I forget, were you chanting or were you doing some devotional service? And she says, no, I was playing. Very straightforward. I was playing. That's the nature of a child. They're very simple, they're very straightforward, you see, at least they're good ones. But that's generally the nature of a child. Now modern society, one is trained, especially in the political field. Like Chanakya said, in politics you want to succeed, you have to be a crooked tree, then no one will cut you down. But that's why the Brahmanas, they stayed away from politics. They stayed away from the government and all that, because it's practically impossible to be a politician and a Brahmana. Chanakya actually, he came down to that level as to teach the politicians how to be politicians. And that way, just like Dronacharya taught them how to fight, he's teaching them. But they offered him that you stay in the king's palace. He refused. He lived in a grass hut. He refused to take a salary. He told them, you want to be politician, this is how to do it. But he refused himself to completely come down to that level. This is Brahminical culture. He could have had a big palace to live in, but instead he lived in a grass hut. He could have had a big salary. He didn't want any salary. If you give something, he'd take it and he'd distribute that to the poor or whatever. He'd always live in a simple way. This is a Brahminical culture, is that one unnecessarily doesn't want to have a comfortable life. Once that one has enough to practice Krishna consciousness. The modern ideal is trying to get more and more comforts. And to maintain these comforts, they have to work so hard. The standard of living. I saw an advertisement for some kind of movie. 3 housewives, they couldn't meet the standard of living, so they robbed a bank or something. This is the idea. They work so hard, they create some sort of artificial standard where they have to maintain so many machines. The big Playboy magazine, and I can't mention the name of the other magazine, these big editors, their thing is to spend millions of dollars on gadgets. There's a gadget magazine. And just to maintain the gadgets, one of these guys has $45,000 a year engineer just to maintain his video TVs and his tape recorders and his automatic clothes hangers and everything. It's in the In-Flight magazine. Now this is his success, you see that. he can have so many gadgets. So he has to work so hard. He doesn't know exactly how long he can keep it up, but he's trying, you see, to amass as many gadgets as they can make. So these completely artificial standard of existence is glorified by people. They think that this is somehow the standard, but this actually is just like a desert. There's not a drop. Every day they have to buy a new gadget because there's not a drop of happiness there. There's a drop, this slight little drop, that new thing. All right, they look, play with it. All right, a new toy. Then they get bored. Just in a desert, like a drop. Not enough to satisfy, just enough to wet your tongue. Then you go on and on and on. But what Lord Caitanya and Nityananda are offering is their giving of the flood. The happiness, the sublime bliss which they're actually giving, the love for Krishna, that is actually a flood. Flood of love for God. It is inconceivable. Nobody can imagine that how much happiness is there. And happiness which doesn't have any mixture of misery. In material life, every form of happiness has got some misery with it. The more illegal it is, the more unauthorized, the more anxiety there is. The more danger. Like the people robbing the banks always, or people doing some kind of sneaky business, they always have to be duplicitous. The more straightforward, well, if it's just the normal, like in the Vedic society, person goes through just a normal human life, that's considered to be a standard of happiness of one. You see, just the honest material life, get married, have children, just without any spiritual touch, just the regular work every day, do your work, bring home the bread, whatever. That's the happiness of one. The maximum happiness a human being can have is one. And as much as they go over trying to exceed that, then on the other hand they have to suffer more anxiety and misery, or diseases or whatever. You can't cheat the material nature. Then to go higher, then you go up to the Gandharvas. They have 10 times more happiness. Then you go beyond that, and then you go up to the Kinnaras, and they're another 10 times. You go up to the Siddhas, they're another 10 times. You go up to the demigods, they're another 10 times. You go up to Indra, he's 100 times. You go beyond Indra, of course, even there, then the Asuras are in there. They also, the regular full Asuras who have their planets like Sutala, they also have a lot of enjoyment. More than human beings. But more than them are the demigods, and more is Indra. Beyond Indra, 1,000 of time Brahma. It said that even beyond those living in Satyaloka, the planet of Brahma, that all their happiness is not considered even a drop compared to the happiness of realization of the impersonal Brahman. These impersonalist yogis who realize the Brahman, the bliss in that Brahman is more than all the material happiness by like a drop compared to the ocean. But even those who are absorbed in the bliss of impersonal Brahman, they find that the happiness of love for Krishna is so many times greater than that they compare the happiness of Brahman as the impression of calf's hoof in the mud. That amount of water that it can hold compared to the ocean. I'm going to be flying back to India over the Pacific. You don't even over the Atlantic, ocean. This 7-hour flight times 600 miles an hour. Was it 4,200 miles, something like that, from England to New York. When you fly over the Pacific, and you go from here to Hawaii, is about 5 hours, 6-hour flight. And from there to, say, Hong Kong is another 10 to 12-hour flight. So you're going like 18 hours, and you look down, and there's just water, and water, and water, and water, and more water, and just water, and that's all. And then some, then you come in here, there's a little island, that's Hawaii. Little island midway, this little speck in this, just like unlimited expanse of water. So you compare all that water to the little impression of a calf's hoof print. And I don't. How the proportion is mind-boggling. That is the proportion of happiness compared to the Brahman, and the whole material happiness is not even a drop, just like one drop compared to the ocean of the Brahman happiness. So how much happiness one achieves when one is fully Krishna conscious? This is inconceivable. And that is what Lord Caitanya is giving freely. Shri Krishna Caitanya Doya Koroho Bichar Bichar Korle Chitte Pave Chamatkar. So if you use your logic and reason and then try to analyze, well, what is Lord Caitanya? What do you get out of Lord Chaitanya's movement? You can't begin to tell people what they get. They don't even know what a human being is. What is a soul? What is a spiritual life? They have not even an idea. What is the material world? What are the planets on the material world? What are the material happinesses they could achieve in the material world? The material happinesses are so great on the higher planets. Why do you think all the sages are working so hard, doing tapasyas to get Siddhaloka? I met one man in India, he said that, I said, why don't you get married? He said, I don't want any of these material women on this world. I want an apsara. The women on the higher planet, they are much better. He said, I want to take birth on heavenly planet, then I'll get married. Or maybe America. Slight defect, propaganda has bewildered him. But he wasn't a sage. He's a bewildered person. But anyway, the people, they have some idea of higher standard. But due to propaganda, they think when they come to America, their bubble is popped. But they think it must be something like Indraloka. But the happiness on those higher planets is so great that they want to achieve that happiness. That's the happiness. If you read the Bible and the Quran, this is basically material happiness, the heavenly situations described. Especially in the Quran, they describe so many gardens and facilities for material enjoyment. And that's their idea. One of the ideas. There's two ideas. Anyway, it's another subject. So the people, their impetus is to have happiness, but they don't even know what is the happiness in the material world. But it's over publicized. the modern day, just like the propaganda for sex, the propaganda for intoxication, it's over-propagandized, over-publicized, overrated. So many times, there's some more than overrated. The material sense gratification is being overrated. Due to they want to sell a pack of lung cancer, what do you call it? Those little sticks they smoke. So then, they're not very attractive, so that they'll have some, picture of some beautiful young man, woman together holding this pack, and then they're attracted, and then they're trying, in this way, this is the advertising technique. Use sex appeal to sell soap, cigarette, whatever, anything. This is the highest happiness in the material world. But, even though it might be the highest happiness in each individual body, it's overrated. In itself, it's not fully satisfying. All these material enjoyment, they're all being overrated. The happiness that people expect to get from their toys is so short-lived. Even for a moment if they get some thrill, but it's short-lived. And then they get so much entangled by the whole thing that it's overrated. In fact, it's completely misrated. When a person's on fire, when they're completely fixed in a particular idea, whether gross sense gratification or some kind of subtle desire that they've dwelled upon, they meditated upon, they've developed an attachment for, it's very hard to get them to see the light. They're attached. They're clinging on. If you say that, no, this is Maya, then they get angry. What do you mean Maya? What do you mean? They get so angry. Just like Indra, when Brahma came down and said, what are you doing here as a pig? You're the king of the demigods. You come back to Indraloka. He said, what do you mean? These are my wife and my kitties. I'm very happy here, wallowing in the mud and eating the maggots and the stool. This is very wonderful food here. As much as you can eat. Right? Snorting away. Because he had a pig body, he became absorbed in that. He couldn't see the reality. And finally then Brahma, he killed the piggy mother and piggylets. And then Indra was crying, what have you done? You killed my wife and my children. He's crying. And then Brahma threw some water from his kamandalu on Indra, and he came out, he got his memory of his previous birth. Who am I? Then he could see that, what an illusion. What am I doing? My God. Because he had committed some offenses and fallen down. So this is the nature. We get over-attached. We lose the ability to see what is Maya and what is Krishna conscious. So we have to be very careful. Not to be deluded by the material nature. And to be always fixed in devotional service. Not to get misled by the false propaganda of material satisfaction. Whatever happiness there is, what to speak, even on higher planets where there's none of these problems like diseases and things. Even all that happiness is nothing compared to the happiness of spiritual life. Which is nothing compared to which is just infinitesimal compared to the happiness of Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And that is being given by Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu. That's his great mercy. Hare Krishna.